I'm back. I graduated, I'm about to turn 30, and I make my TikTok crush giggle in a comment. I'm basically invincible, baby. The degree to which we are back cannot be calculated, but raw estimates place it at so. I was put on this earth to make poor life choices and make beautiful women laugh, and I don't have a punchline for that, that's just true. The uncertainty principle, an important idea in quantum mechanics that got kind of famous on its own outside the context of physics and became the subject of many YouTube videos. YouTube videos with riveting jokes, such as,
"This is where the joke about Heisenberg comes from, where he gets stopped by police who tell him how fast he was driving, and Heisenberg says, 'Great, now I'm lost.'"
My bladder can barely hold its content. And this is no critique, of course. I gladly jumped on the bandwagon too. In fact, here's how I was explaining the uncertainty principle back at the age of 24.
At any time, you could ask to this apple 2 questions. Number 1, where are you? And number 2, where are you going?
My god, Gorge, hurry up! We can't keep this pace for the skibbity Gen Z crowd, okay? They got their attention span bulldozed by 12 hours of unsupervised internet every day since the age of 9. Help! Whatever, I'm so proud of you for everything you've done for the both of us, and you were beautiful beyond words, both inside and outside, and it pains me to watch these videos back because I think about how much you couldn't see it at the time, and everything I am, I owe it to you and your joyful, creative, relentless perseverance, but Gorge! We gotta spit it up!
Seems like you got,
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
You know what? I changed my mind. That's mean. I'm not gonna do my older self dirty like that. She was doing her best with the information she had at the time, and she did a bloody excellent job at surviving. I'm just saying, I'm gonna take it from here. Alright, monetized in 3 videos. Let's go, baby! Keeping views camelators, okay? I need to buy myself the double standard Paris boots. Don't laugh, this is a medical expense. The idea behind the uncertainty principle is actually pretty simple. Have you ever tried to take a photo of something? If you did, you already know that you can either focus on the subject or you can focus on the background, but you can't really do both at the same time. Also, look how pretty my nails are. In fact, the more you focus on the subject, the less you're gonna be able to focus on the background, and vice versa. Well, the uncertainty principle works a little bit like that. According to quantum mechanics, there are some quantities in nature that cannot be determined with infinite precision at the same time. For example, position x and momentum p. The mathematical way of saying this is that the uncertainty over the position, which we call delta x, multiplied by the uncertainty over momentum, which we call delta p, has to be greater or equal than a certain physical quantity, a very small number that physicists usually write as h over 4 pi, or sometimes h bar over 2. H is called Planck's constant, and it's nothing complicated, it's just a very small number. So the right side of this equation is just a very small number. Very small indeed, but not 0. And that's important. The amount of information that we can have about the position of a particle depends on the information that we have about that particle's momentum, and the product of the two cannot go below a certain threshold. There's also other couples of quantities that work in the same way, for example, energy and time. If this was just a simple 3-minute explainer video for YouTube, that's the explanation I would give. The outline of this hypothetical video would be something like, 1. The uncertainty principle is kind of like when you take a photo, then going to the explanation of, oh, when the subject goes out of focus, the background goes out of focus, and all that. 2. Here's how we express the uncertainty principle in an equation, and here's what the parts of that equation really mean. 3. Then, maybe if I wanted the video to be a little bit longer, I'd touch on the philosophical implication of this principle, maybe talk about determinism or free will or something like that. And then 4, a word from our sponsor. Do you like being scammed? Are you very gullible and stupid? Well, I've got the product for you! With Honey, you can save up to 30%! Most of the videos on YouTube about this topic follow a similar outline. They'll start out with some sort of trade-off that exists in life. They'll say, well, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is kind of like that. They present the equation, they explain what the terms mean, maybe sprinkle in some anecdotes about the life of Heisenberg, and then sometimes they briefly touch on the philosophical implications of this principle, maybe talking again about determinism or free will or our place in the universe or something like that. Is this a good explanation? Well, to quote an Italian philosopher,
sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
Let's start by all going in a circle and saying something nice about this explanation. I'll go first. I think this metaphor of the camera lens is good science communication. It does, in my opinion, what science communication is supposed to do. It explains a very abstract topic in a way that is simple, fast, accessible, and memorable. I used this metaphor for the first time back in 2017 at a conference organized by a friend of mine that was, indeed, filmed on a potato. Almost 10 years ago, let's not think about that? Why would you bring it up? Why would you do that to me? And I used the same metaphor again in 2020 in that video that I showed you before, which was actually made for a science communication summer school in Copenhagen, which I did attend remotely all the way through, but never got university credits for because I missed the deadline to turn the paperwork in. I love undiagnosed ADHD. The professor organizing the summer school at the time specifically highlighted the metaphor of the camera lens going in and out of focus. She highlighted it as a very good example of science communication, saying that it's a very clear and intuitive metaphor, and it's also perfect for the medium in which it exists, in this case, video. So for a YouTube video about the uncertainty principle, it's a very good metaphor. It gets the point across very efficiently. Good job, Costanza. However, Elizabeth Leane notices in her book Reading Popular Physics that there are some risks when using metaphors to explain science, and especially when we use them to explain quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics is particularly abstract and counterintuitive. The role of metaphors in science is a very interesting field of research that's just gonna have to be the topic for another video because we don't have time to get into it right now. But what we need to notice for now is that metaphors and explanations serve two very different functions. Explanations are meant to be taken literally, while metaphors are meant to be taken, well, metaphorically. Metaphors are inherently ambiguous as figures of speech. In fact, a good metaphor is one that lends itself to many layers of hidden meaning, many interpretations. On the other hand, explanations are supposed to be straightforward. In fact, if an explanation can be interpreted in many ways, that's not like a rich and powerful explanation, that's just confusing. If we are in a classroom, the use of metaphors as explanations is not going to be that big of a problem, because even if a teacher uses a metaphor to get the initial point across, they usually also give a rigorous, non-metaphorical explanation for what you're supposed to learn. Like, a university professor is not going to explain the uncertainty principle to you as, oh, it's kind of like when your camera can't only focus on the subject or the background and then just call it a day. Like, of course not. They're going to spend 2 or so hours going over the mathematics of the wave packet and the Fourier transform and all that good stuff. And if you want something like that, by the way, the channel Physics Explained has a video going over the math behind the uncertainty principle. It's the most beginner-friendly lecture I've ever seen on this topic, and it actually explains where the principle comes from using wave mechanics. It's a very easy lecture to understand even if you don't know much about physics, and you should really check it out. There's also these 2 videos by 3 Blue on Brown, who definitely doesn't need my endorsement, but obviously has it anyway. They're about the Fourier transform and how that plays a role in the uncertainty principle. But it's also important as science communicators to admit that most people who click on a 3-minute video about uncertainty principle probably are not in the mood for an hour-long lecture of advanced calculus. Sometimes as a science communicator, you only have their attention for 3 minutes, or even less. Sometimes that's all the energy that people have in that moment. So because oftentimes metaphors are really all that people have the energy for, in science communication, a lot of times the metaphor becomes the explanation. And this is where things start to get tricky. Because as Leane argues, metaphors can carry hidden meanings, meanings that maybe the science communicator didn't even think about originally. And those hidden layers of meaning can change how the explanation is received and change the ideas that get created in the minds of the audience. Especially if we remember, as we often should do when we're doing science communication, that the mind of the audience is not a blank slate. Y'all have all sorts of preconceived ideas about how the world works, both good and bad, and metaphors are going to clash with those ideas in unexpected ways. To go back to the uncertainty principle, which I promise is the topic of this video, a difficult point to drive home about that uncertainty principle is that it's actually not about experiments at all. This is very counterintuitive because when the uncertainty principle is expressed in words, it's often explained as we can't know the speed and the position with infinite precision of the same particle at the same time.
The Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that it's impossible to simultaneously know an object's location and velocity.
Basically, we can never measure both the position and momentum of an object to 100% accuracy.
It tells us that there is a fundamental and universal limit to how much we can know about pairs of quantities known as conjugate variables.
Using words like we or no make you think of something that humans do, maybe an experiment or a measurement. This confusion is actually something that physics students get wrong all the time too. They often think that the uncertainty of the uncertainty principle is the experimental uncertainty. This one is the uncertainty that is expressed, for example, in error bars, but this one has nothing to do with the uncertainty principle. It's actually something else. The actual uncertainty that the uncertainty principle refers to has to do with the fact that in quantum mechanics, particles are described by waves. The wave describing a particle is complex. It's it's usually the sum of a lot of simpler waves. And these simpler waves can in turn be described by a function. And when that function gets thinner, the wave describing the particle gets larger and vice versa. This connection between these two functions is actually what the uncertainty principle is about. By the way, the model for these animations is made on GeoGebra by a guy named Furio completely for free. So everybody say thank you Furio in the comments. Crucially, the uncertainty principle is a property of particles that exists outside of us, outside of our perception and outside of our measurements. It's not that we cannot know these quantities at the same time, it's that these quantities cannot exist at the same time. But hey, notice how many words I needed to clarify that. This is not easy to clarify with words, goes without saying, and I was worried that my little metaphor, the one about the camera focusing on the subject and the background and all of that, was contributing to this misconception. Because a camera is an artificial object, an object made by us through which we view reality. Reality itself, if you think about it, isn't really in and out of focus. That's something that happens when we watch it. Another video on the subject uses the metaphor of a teeter-totter. And this is also a good and intuitive metaphor, but a teeter-totter is still a man-made object, so there's a similar problem as with the camera. Maybe these metaphors are subtly but consistently promoting the idea that the uncertainty principle is something that comes up when we observe reality, something that has to do with our machinery, something that we make. And that's again not the case. This whole process that I just did, by the way, actually has a scientific name, and it's called overthinking the fuck out of a very simple situation. I love undiagnosed ADHD! The difficulty of explaining quantum mechanics in a short amount of time is a problem that every physics communicator faces sooner or later. Some science communicators even find themselves in the awkward position of having to clarify that what you might have heard in another video is actually not true.
The meaning of this equation is often explained incorrectly. Many people claim it is a measurement thing. So, the story goes, if you use very short wavelength light, you're hitting the electron with a photon with a lot of energy, so you hit it hard, and now you don't know its velocity because you knock it off in some direction or another. So this is a totally wrong explanation of Heisenberg's principle, although it was the first one I was taught back in high school. Sorry to out you, Mr. G.
Now, this is the explanation that gets thrown around when Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is discussed. However, this is not Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
But as some of you may already know, this is completely and utterly wrong.
For similar reasons, my friend Cole Creighton vowed to basically ban quantum mechanics from his TikTok account.
And there's certain subjects that I've just unofficially banned on my channel, just because I don't think that they can be, at least by myself, that they can't be condensed well enough to be easily consumable. A big one is quantum physics.
As he told me when he was in a podcast about science communication that I started 3 years ago and abandoned after 5 episodes, I love undiagnosed ADHD. But mind you, this is not the fault of science communicators themselves. Far from it. There is a core problem when communicating quantum mechanics to the public, because quantum mechanics is written in mathematics, like in the same way that Russian poetry is written in Russian. It's the language of physics. But a lot of people who want to learn a little bit about quantum mechanics don't have the time, money, patience, whatever, to study advanced mathematics, potentially for years, because that's kind of what you need to understand it. They're just not up for that. They have other life priorities, and that's obviously completely okay. So they want to learn maybe a bit about Russian poetry without having to learn all that pesky Russian. In fact, a lot of authors of books about quantum mechanics for the general audience explicitly conceptualize themselves as translators from the mathematical world of physics into the day-to-day language. Oh, what's that in the corner? How did I find that master's thesis that I'm citing, you ask?
I actually did it myself. Yeah.
And let me make something very clear. This is not the fault of the audience. It's completely okay to learn a little bit of a subject without becoming experts in it or dedicating hours and hours and weeks and months and years to study it. Most people do most things as amateurs. You shouldn't be ashamed of enjoying things even if you're not technically good at them. And that absolutely includes mathematics and physics. In fact, I think it's cool that people want to use their limited free time to learn about physics. I think the 3-minute explainer video is a very good thing that should exist. Because some people only have 3 minutes to dedicate to theoretical physics, and I don't think they should be left behind. But this situation creates a very weird set of incentives for the science communicator. The public wants to learn as much as possible about quantum mechanics without having to learn mathematics. So people who talk about quantum mechanics to the public have a strong incentive to paint their material as, I'll teach you quantum mechanics without all the pesky mathematics. Some books about quantum mechanics for the general audience will promise this to their readers more or less explicitly. It's marketing, you know? It's kind of like an under-eye cream promotes the fact that you're gonna look like the model in the advertisement. Like, they're implying that, but not really. You know what I mean? Hoffman, for example, promises to write without mathematics, yet without important omission of concept. The mathematics in Ray's book can be skipped without missing the main strands of the argument. This is present in YouTube videos too. For example, this adorable young gentleman who probably has a lot of expertise in what he's talking about.
We'll be looking at a topic known as Fourier transforms. However, don't worry, I'll explain the basics of Fourier transforms using just pictures and English. We won't need to know any complicated maths or even go into any complicated maths.
Which is admirable, but also kind of useless. And because he cannot use mathematics in his explanations, the important parts are omitted anyway. He says,
if our original function is really, really wide on its horizontal axis, then the Fourier transform of that function is going to be really, really narrow. This is a property of Fourier transform.
So you've just transferred whatever was not understood about the uncertainty principle onto the concept of Fourier transform. This is what I mean when I say that quantum mechanics is written in mathematics in the same way that Russian poetry is written in Russian. If you know how the Fourier transform works, if you've seen it, if you speak mathematics, so to speak, the uncertainty principle is actually not that surprising or counterintuitive. But most people are just not up for that. And good for them! So we're stuck explaining advanced physics without mathematics. Even Philip Ball, one of my favorite science writers, author of banger after banger after... not gonna lie, this one's actually kind of a skip after banger. Even Philip Ball, the second best science writer alive. The first one is Melanie Mitchell, the third one is James Gleick, don't at me. Even Philip Ball, when writing what is actually one of my favorite books about quantum mechanics, titled Beyond Weird, says the most fundamental message of quantum theory isn't a purely mathematical one. I definitely think it's important to write some version of quantum mechanics that is accessible to people who don't know advanced math. That's why I'm a science communicator. But I take issue with the idea that one can understand quantum mechanics without understanding the math behind it, because this is just not true. It's perfectly okay to want to learn a little bit about quantum mechanics even if you're not up for the mathematics. That's completely fine. But it's important to not blur the lines between science communication, which is what we do here on YouTube, and science education, which is what you do in a classroom. The goal of science education is to teach science, to make people gain new skills that they can use to navigate the real world. In the context of a classroom, there's moments where students are given new information, usually through formal lecturing. But, crucially, there's also moments where students are putting that information to the test, usually with guided exercises and homework and autonomous study at home. And this second part, the homework, is very important. It's the part where you actually learn the subject, and it's usually, let's face it, not very fucking fun. Most people don't want more homework in their lives. Science education needs to teach students the subject, and if the students also have fun while learning, that's a wonderful bonus. I'm sure we all remember how a teacher that was particularly maybe charismatic or entertaining or caring made it a lot easier to study for the subject, but it's completely unrealistic to think that every class will be nothing but fun in the same way that watching YouTube would be. Teachers cannot, for example, simplify a subject as much as they want. They cannot skip a part of the curriculum just because they think it's boring. The priorities of science education are learning first and entertainment second. Science communication, on the other hand, is something that people engage with in their free time. It's not a syllabus dictated by schools and governments and university, but rather, it's guided by the public's own curiosity and needs. Science communication is something that people watch for fun. They click on my videos, but as soon as they're bored, they click away. They go to a museum not to receive a difficult lecture that they're gonna have to study at home, but to just spend a fun Sunday afternoon. They pick up a Brian Cox book, but they're not gonna finish it if they don't want to. Even if they're watching a literal MIT lecture on YouTube, they can click away anytime, and they don't have to do the exercises if they don't want to. If someone learns something from my videos, that's awesome and I'm honored, but packaging the topics in a clickable way and keeping my audience entertained is always going to be the top priority for me. The priorities of science communications are reversed. It's entertainment first and learning second. And plenty of people get these two confused, including communicators. Obviously, the fact that this niche of YouTube is called educational videos doesn't help. Babe, I'm not doing education, I'm doing entertainment. I write my little monologues about history of physics and philosophy of science, and then I put on a character and I perform them to camera. This is not a lecture. And this isn't to discredit what I do. Obviously, art and entertainment have an undeniable power to change people's lives and to motivate them to do important things, including learning. If I thought this was useless, I wouldn't use my time doing it. But I'm stressing the difference between science education and science communication because I feel like a lot of science communicators, my past self very much included, overthink themselves into a miserable state, trying to make people learn through their YouTube videos. It's a noble pursuit, but babe, we're fundamentally swimming upstream. There's a concept that I quite like called the circle of knowledge. At the center we have what we know. Right outside of that is what we don't know. And outside of that there's what we don't know that we don't know, which is actually like 98% of human knowledge. I think that a lot of science communicators think of themselves as taking people from the middle level into the core level. They think of themselves as explainers. Surely some of them manage to explain complex topics, and good for them. It's always very satisfying to get one of those "I never understood this subject until I saw your video" type of comments. But for most people who watch a video, that's not going to be the case, right? And even for those who do leave those type of comments, like, they might be wrong about their own intuition. Like, maybe they actually understood jack shit about what I've said. We have no way of testing them because this is not science education. So I think it's more productive for science communicators to think of ourselves as taking people from the outside layer into the middle one. My job is not to teach you things. My job is to make you curious. My videos are probably not your final stop. It's not a situation where you either learn the uncertainty principle in the next 10 minutes or it's never gonna happen again. You'll notice that my videos are full of references to other YouTube videos, books, research papers. I quote plenty of sources, even when I'm representing an idea that I myself don't fully agree with. And that's because my audience doesn't really disappear after they're done with my work. So, where do they go from here? Where am I sending them? What am I funneling them towards? You might watch another YouTube video on the subject, maybe one that goes into more details. Or you could pick up a book that I recommended. Or, if I've done a really good job, maybe you could watch a lecture or read a scientific paper that fell off the back of a truck. As a science communicator, I am 10 times better at my job if I think of myself as a humble servant of curiosity. I collect people on their daily social media scroll, I entertain them for a few minutes, and hopefully I convince them to dig a little deeper. This is what I'm here to do, and this is what I want to do. So maybe I can stop overthinking the fuck out of everything that I say. What do you think?